Hi, my name is Dave Gerhardt and welcome to episode 13 of PercussionEducation.com. Today we're going to start talking about the ruff. Now people call the ruff either a ruff or a drag interchangeably. I like to call it the ruff because as a percussionist or a drummer, I never want to drag, okay? But traditionally it was called a drag where you have two notes in front of a large note and then three notes was called the ruff, okay? So traditionally that's where that comes from, okay? I call it a ruff and then I call it a three-stroke ruff, so just so you know my terminology. Doesn't matter what you call it, just as long as it sounds good and you can play it, okay? So in order to start working on the ruff today, we have to start working on getting our sticks to bounce, okay? So when we're doing this, we got to make sure that all of our fulcrums are good up to this point, all of our technique is good, because once we start doing the roll or bouncing our sticks on the drum, it's going to be one of the hardest things that we're going to have to do on this instrument, okay? And to make it sound good, we've got to make sure everything in our technique is good, okay? So now we're going to start talking about bouncing the stick. There are many ways to go about this. There are many techniques to do it. The way that I do it is going to be like this. I'm going to take the stick and all I'm going to do, I'm going to use my dominant hand in the beginning, and all I'm going to do is drop that stick onto the drum. And what I'm trying to do is get as many bounces as I can out of that stick. And once I get to the end where the stick is going to die and not bounce anymore, I pick the stick up. Okay, and then I do it with the other hand. You've got to make sure at this point that your fulcrum is correct, because if you're holding back too far, like we talked about in one of the early episodes, it's going to die. So you've got to make sure that you're holding the stick in the same spot on both hands, okay? And I'm just letting the stick drop, and once it starts to die and not bounce anymore, I rebound it. Okay, now when I do a roll stroke, and we'll talk about this in upcoming episodes, I primarily use an arm stroke, okay? We'll talk about that in the future, but just make sure that when you're doing this, either whether you're using your arm or your wrist, that you're getting bounces. You don't want to let it die, push into the drum and die. That's pushing too hard. It's also giving way too much tension in your sticks. Just let the stick drop. Okay, then what I do is I reduce it and I try and do 4 bounces. And once I get 4 bounces, then I pick it up. Either with the arm or with the wrist. Now if you're not getting a consistent bounce, that means that you're either not putting enough speed into the force of the stick going down into the drum, or you're not putting enough pressure with your thumb. The key to this, and to get more tight bounces, distance between the notes, is to push in with your thumb just a little bit. So once I put a little pressure there, then the bounces become closer together. If I just let the stick drop, it makes it have more space in between the bounces. Okay, so I start with 4. And then I start to speed that up and try and get them to sound faster. Then I do it with my left hand. Okay, so on and so forth. Then 3. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm trying to train my hand to stop after the amount of bounces that I want, whether it be 3, 4, 2, whatever, okay? And I'm starting to work on this fluid motion of pushing it into the drum, leaving my hand down a little bit longer so that the stick will bounce, and just letting the stick do all the work for you. When you're doing this, you don't want to be doing 3 individual wrist strokes. You want the stick to bounce. So if I were just to let go of the stick, it would just bounce. Now when you're also be thinking about all my fingers are on the stick, they are touching the stick, they're not constricting it like I'm holding a bat, they're also not off like I'm drinking tea. So they're all on the stick, touching the stick the whole time. Alright, then we get to 2. This is where I find students try and do 2 individual strokes, and if I were to do that slow it'd be. But I want to make sure that it's bouncing. That's why I start with as many as possible and then go to 4, go to 3, go to 2. So that it's not from the beginning I'm trying to, because a lot of students will want to do just 2 individual strokes, but I want to make sure that the stick is bouncing. And okay, and the rudiment we're going to talk about today is the ruff. Okay, the ruff is 2 small notes, 2 grace notes, followed by a large note. In this case, it's going to be a quarter note. Okay, and all we're doing, the flam was 1 note, and then the large note, this is 2 notes. So all we're doing is we're elongating or putting an embellishment before the note. Okay. The ruff. Okay, so the way that I do the ruff is I get 2 bounces with my right hand. Now you'll notice that my right hand is much closer to the drum. Similar to the flam, it's not going to be up here. I want to make it grace notes, okay? Grace notes in nature are always softer than the main note. So what I do is I start with a more open rudiment at the beginning, where I do 2 bounces. And then I speed that up so I get to this. Now, if I'm playing in a marching style, it's going to be more open. I'm going to hear those 2 notes. In a concert style, we don't want to hear that. We just want to elongate the note. So we're going to hear more like this. Okay, so what I do is I work on one side, making sure that one hand is staying here, the other hand is doing the accented note, and then I switch and do. Okay, same thing with the left hand, I'm going to do it slow. And speed that up. Making sure at all times I'm bouncing. I'm not doing 2 individual strokes. I can't tell you more about that than making sure that it's bouncing and not doing 2 individual strokes. Okay, so we're going to talk way more about ruffs. We're going to talk way more about bouncing the sticks and get into rolling and making our sticks work and making a good concert snare drum roll for us. Okay, so that's it for this episode. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them on the comments below, or you can contact me on Twitter at dgerhart. That's D-G-E-R-H-A-R-T. I've had a lot of great comments, so I appreciate those. Keep them coming, and tell your friends about the podcast and the videos that I'm putting out here. I appreciate that, and we'll see you on the next episode of percussioneducation.com. Thanks.